Great. Thank you, Senator Manning and Treasurer Read, for agreeing to meet with us and talk a little bit about your run for Secretary of State in the Democratic primary. Why don't we start off by having each of you just say a little bit about why you're running and why you think you're the best candidate. James, if you wouldn't mind going first, that'd be great.
Delighted to. My name is James Ivory Manning Jr. Why am I running for the position? I'm a public servant running to restore the integrity and trust to the office of Secretary of State. I will defend our democracy and preserve our vote by mail and ensure elections divisions and county elections workers are safe, secure, and all data is secure as well. As a former United States Army Assistant Inspector General, I have conducted audits nationally and internationally for large military organizations to include military personnel and equipment. My rewards have been that my audits have been very thorough, and I've received commendations for the work that I've done in those areas. As a member of the State Land Board, I will ensure that our public lands, waterways, and forests are not for sale. That's why I've earned the exclusive endorsement of the Sierra Club in 350 Salem, Oregon. I'm looking forward to preserving our natural resources, and this is unwaverable.
Great. Thank you very much. Tobias, can you tell us a little bit about why you're running?
Yeah, I'm running because this is a really important office. That is always true, but I think it's especially true right now when so much of what we care about in our democracy and our system of government is under threat. We have a lot of great things in Oregon around mail-in elections and automatic voter registration, but I think we would make a mistake in thinking that those are automatic or that they are invulnerable. There are people who are trying to roll back those signature policies and things that are so important to us. On top of that, I think the Secretary of State's office has suffered from a lot of turmoil and instability in recent years, which has hampered its ability to do important work like the audit function. We need to restore that integrity and make sure that there's an audit division that is driven not by politics or predetermined agendas, but by realistic assessments of risk and opportunity. And I certainly learned a lot in the legislature, but I've added to that by being state treasurer over the last 7 years. And I think there is just no substitute for the specific experience of being one of Oregon's 3 constitutional statewide officers and leading a statewide agency, setting a vision, ensuring a culture, making sure that hundreds of employees who work at Treasury have the resources they need and holding them accountable to do the work that we expect of them. These are really important preparations for an office that I think needs that kind of stability and professionalism to restore the trust and capacity that Oregonians expect. So I'm excited about the race, excited about the office, and looking forward to our conversation about lots of specifics today.
Great, thank you. And I think we'll just kind of bounce back and forth in terms of who goes first. So Tobias, if you wouldn't mind going first on this question. And it involves campaign finance reform. HB 4024 has laid out a number of campaign finance contribution campaigns contribution limits, disclosure requirements, multiple other aspects that are going to be very new to Oregon. It's a very complicated law. It was pulled together fairly rapidly. What would be your approach as Secretary of State to making sure you're implementing that with just implementing it according to the law and well?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and I want to answer it really directly. I think it is essential to do this right. We're overdue, frankly, for this sort of approach. Oregon is, I think, late to this game, but I'm glad the legislature stepped up and passed legislation. The essential thing next is to have a successful implementation. I have seen too many things. In fact, we might even have a Hall of Fame in Oregon for good intentions that are followed by bad execution. And that's why I think it's really important to have someone in the Secretary of State's office with a track record of success in implementing complicated things. one of the best examples for me that fits with this is the notion of Oregon Saves. When we took a program that was just a concept and implemented it in a way that 19 other states are now emulating for us, having people with an opportunity to save for retirement. That's a complicated thing too. So when it comes to campaign finance reform, the most important thing is to roll up our sleeves and understand exactly what capacity exists inside the Secretary of State's office, to be diligent and relentless in making sure that we understand all of the intricacies and the details, and make that an easy experience for candidates and campaigns, to make sure that they are following the laws, to make sure that it's accessible and easy for Oregonians to navigate, because obviously part of the promise here is increased stability and transparency. So it's very likely that there will need to be adjustments, I think, in future legislatures to improve things. So I want to have that kind of a relationship with the legislature, as I have as treasurer, to be able to go back, add capacity, and continue to be relentless, so that we are implementing so that our implementation is faithful to legislative intent and allows Oregonians to have confidence in the direction we're headed.
Okay. And in terms of just, are there specific components or steps that you would take to ensure that, you are implementing it correctly? So you were talking about bringing people together and being able to adjust with the legislature as needed. But I guess in terms of how do you take a law and actually build it out into a program?
It's exactly what we've done time after time at Treasury, whether it was Oregon Saves, whether it was the transfer of the unclaimed property program from the Department of State Lands to Treasury, and being diligent about that, step by step, understanding what does the specific language here mean practically? What do we need to change about processes and procedures? What does that mean in terms of what's going to be required of capacity inside the Secretary of State's office? Having that with a clear plan that the legislature will understand, will invest in, and will be able to meet our targets. It's very much a matter of having that the connection between schedule and resources and accountability. That's what's going to be required, and that's why I've learned how these things play out by talking to, I think we're at 24 of the 36 county clerks across the state, understanding what issues they confront when they are dealing with the administration of elections. Those kinds of insights allow me to understand what details are going to be required as we go through implementation.
And James, if you wouldn't mind answering the same question, just 4024 has a lot of components to it. It's a pretty complicated program. If you could also address the issue about, what is your experience managing a complicated implementation of a program like this? And what are any specific issues that you would look for, or methods you would look for to implement it correctly? And I'm sorry, I think you're muted right now.
All right. Absolutely. House Bill 4024 was one that, as a member of the Senate Rules Committee, I voted on it to move it out of committee. And when it got to the Senate floor, I voted for it. I agree with more than 80% of Oregonians that campaign finance reform is necessary. Oregon is about a group of maybe a half dozen or a dozen states that still have unlimited campaign finance. What I would do specifically, well, first off, the bill is not ready to move forward until it is funded. So the funding mechanism hasn't been done yet. So when we go in and the e-board meets, it will have to give that money to Secretary of State in order to move the bill to implement it, actually, which will be next year sometime, guesstimation. So one of the things about this bill that's really important, that it will limit statewide contributions to $3,300 per election cycle. The bad news is that dark money will be able to flow in with impunity. So we can see a rash of donations coming in, large cash cows and stuff, and there's no accountability. That is the part that really bothers me. But we also know that the thing that kicked this whole thing out was the Supreme Court when they did Citizens United, where they declared that money was people or corporations of people. This is how we got on this road here. So I will use best practices of other 36 states that have already campaign finance reform, use best practices and see how to implement those in our system, those that are working well. I think it's critically important that we get this done. And we need to start working on addressing these super PACs and this dark money. Now, from the legislative, talking about accomplishments and things like that, I did a universal health care bill, worked on it for 7 years. Consistency, making sure that I use collaborative efforts with Republicans and Democrats. And I got that bill done last year. Oregon is on the pathway to becoming the first state in the union with a universal health care system. This is something that it takes due diligence, it takes leadership, it takes determination. All of these qualities I have exhibited throughout my entire professional life, especially in the military, where I received the highest honors. So I have a proven, traceable track record of success in building and implementing programs. One program that I did, and I'll just throw this in, while I was in the Army, overseas in Panama, we had family members that couldn't get jobs. There were no jobs available. So I wrote a home-based business policy, which was adopted by a two-star general, and it impacted over 65,000 uniform family members, uniform members and their families that can conduct home-based businesses out of their own homes and use their own resources. That was monumental. If you want to talk about doing something that's very successful, impact, look at my universal health care, that in 2 to 5 years, Oregon will be the first state in the nation to have a universal health care single payer. I think that that's phenomenal. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And James, this question will be for you. What steps would you take to address those Oregonians who don't have confidence in our election results and who are challenging just the legitimacy of vote by mail?
Thank you for that question. Currently, we have a very secure system where we're looking at signature verifications is key. And we have a paper trail of all ballots that are cast and counted securely. So the mis and disinformation out there is something that I intend to do each and every day to make sure that people understand that, for one, vote by mail is the best way to go. And there are some of our federal partners are trying to make it a national model, but it's how we expand to bring more people to the fold. So since I've been in the legislature, we have expanded that to people that are applying for the Oregon Health Plan, that they will automatically be enrolled in the voter system, similar and based off the role and process of motor voter. And this past session, I introduced a bill that will allow first-time college and university students who qualify upon enrollment in the school, they will automatically be registered voters. That bill there is going to take a little work because the complexity of it is dealing with the Department of Revenue and the DMV and other agencies to ensure that we are protecting privacy rights. That's very critical. I intend to do outreach and make sure that everyone understands that here, by protecting and defending our democracy, the same way I did when I served 24 years active duty United States Army, the same way I have been doing when I took an oath here to protect and defend the Constitution of Oregon. I will be very rigorous in doing the exact same thing and making sure that mis and disinformation is debunked and make sure that the sunlight and the truth is always out there, that our elections are safe, secure. One final point. I did introduce a bill a couple of years ago, and it provided for postage paid ballot return envelopes. And the reason for that is that we have places where drop boxes are non-existent, or people in rural communities, frontier communities, or we have people that are disabled and can't get out. those Oregonians that are legal residents and entitled to vote should have the same opportunity. So since I've cast that, Oregon now has the highest voter participation rate in the nation. The claims of voter fraud in Oregon are very minor, and there's no substance to them.
But I guess I'm wondering, like, how would you, beyond kind of expressing and emphasizing the security of our elections, is there anything else that you could imagine doing to kind of help change minds and persuade or convince Oregonians who have their doubts that they can rely on Oregon system?
I have a 36 county plan that I'm engaged on. So I actually go out and talk to people. I do roundtables. I reach out to members of certain communities, any agricultural community. I go out and I talk directly with people. This is not something I started. I've always did this. I connect very well with people. So that's one of the things that, to get out. But we also have to look at the employees of the Secretary of State's office. I mentioned earlier about me with only one with an assistant inspector general auditing experience nationally and internationally. I plan to first conduct a sensing session with all of the employees to find out what their thoughts are, these things that they're experiencing. To many times they already have an answer, but you have to have someone that's willing to listen to them and also implement best practices. Those are approaches that I will be taking.
Great, thank you. Tobias, same question for you. What steps would you take to address those who don't trust the reliability of our election system or vote by mail?
I appreciate the question. It's a really good one, and I want to answer it directly because I think the substance of your question is about the difference between what is actually happening, and there are great things to point out, and what people feel about it. It's that gap between perception and in a lot of cases reality. So this is what has been really interesting to me throughout the conversations I've had around the state with all of these clerks. They're all in very different circumstances, ranging from their budget situations to their physical spaces. But what is common amongst all of them is an absolute commitment to delivering on the promise of secure, accessible, fair elections. And they have a lot of interesting ideas about how that can be clearer and more confidence generating for voters. Some states, those of us, I think, maybe, I'm not sure if it is true in Lane County, but those of the rest of us who are in the metro area have the advantage of something called Ballot tracks. It's a brand name, and there are others that provide that same service. But there's been significant, I think, improvements in the confidence for people who opt into that system, where they get messages when a ballot is on its way to a voter, when it's been received on the way back, and when it's accepted and counted. That should be something that we should do across the entire state. The only thing I've encountered amongst the clerks I've talked to as to why that's not the case already is cost. That's a good investment for the state to make. Another good example comes from California, a county there who has taken a concept we're probably more familiar with in relation to law enforcement and applied it to voting. They've created ride-alongs for people to go along and follow the process, the sequence that a ballot goes through. It's, I think, very durable when someone has the experience of watching all the procedures and protocols and controls that are in place and can tell that story from a firsthand experience to other people who might not be feeling the same kind of confidence that we would want. So I think those are two initial examples, and it's that kind of diligence, I think, that understanding of the processes that can generate confidence that has allowed me to earn the endorsement of the only people in this race who have done the job before. Barbara Roberts, Gene Atkins, Phil Kiesling, all former secretaries of state who understand what it takes to do this job. They've endorsed me, and I think that's significant too.
Tobias, if you can go first on this question. Both of you actually address ballot access and the importance of removing barriers to voting. what is your feeling about Oregon's closed primary system, where, for instance, in your race, 43% of Oregonians will be unable to cast a vote in either your race or the Republican primary?
Yeah, I think it's an issue that we have to continue to grapple with. It's a conversation that Oregonians need to continue to have. Two things that occurred to me right off the start, even before we get to those broader questions. One, there's a lot of work for us to do to remind voters that even if they have chosen not to affiliate with a party, there are still important things that happen on the nonpartisan portions of primary ballots, ranging from school board elections to city councils to bond measures, those sorts of things. One other thing that I've discovered in a conversation with a county clerk was a step that I think could help a lot. There are a number of people that the most common complaint that this clerk gets, they told me, was from people who were automatically registered and, of course, therefore do not have an affiliation, who come in and say, there's been a mistake. I was supposed to get the Republican ballot or the Democratic ballot. The clerk then looks it up and says, sorry, you are not affiliated, and then has to explain that the deadline for changing affiliation has passed. This clerk, and I've confirmed it with a few others, does not feel like it would be any particular problem with workload if we adjusted the deadline for that party affiliation. So allowing people an easier time to vote as they wish, I think, will help and allow people to have a good experience in their first voting opportunity, make it more likely that they will continue to vote. But all of that is separate from your fundamental question. And I think it is undeniable that we leave too many people out. So the conversation needs to continue on that. There are a lot of different ways that we could take that on. Oregonians have voted on that a couple of times in recent years, but I don't think we should give up on that process. We should keep looking for ways that people can participate and have an influence at the earliest possible stage.
I think it's been actually, maybe 10 years since the top two primary was on the ballot. And so I guess, and there's certainly an initiative underway. I guess I'm wondering, as Secretary of State, is that something that you would work with the legislature to perhaps put on the ballot about, opening primaries or some other change that makes it easier for, again, 43% of registered Oregonians to participate in these very, very key races?
One of the things that I've been really proud of as treasurer is developing a reputation as a trusted source of information for the legislature. So if the legislature begins that process, I'd absolutely want to be involved and make sure that a ballot measure or a referral is an accurate reflection of intent. We've also seen plenty of examples recently where what voters thought they were voting on, or at least popularly, wasn't reflected in a perfectly clear way. So getting all those things right is going to be essential. But whenever someone wants to talk about how to make it easier for more people to vote, that's a conversation I'm going to want to be part of.
Thank you. And James, same question for you. In terms of ballot access, one of the key things that's stopping registered Oregonians from participating in very high-profile contests is the fact that we have closed primaries. What would you do, or what is your take on that that system here? And I'm sorry, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Easy answer: encourage same-day voter registration. That is how we invite everybody to the table. Doing that will bring everybody in, regardless of their party affiliation or non-affiliation. By encouraging same-day voter registration, then you bring everybody to the table. The thing is that how do we open the door to encourage participation with all Oregonians? I've been in a lot of conversations with people about various methods of how to get more involvement in our electoral processes. Same-day voter registration has always popped up at the top. Now, whether or not this is going to require a legislative referral to make sure that it is solidified in Oregon's Constitution, or if it's something that people can assume that it's a method on their own. Currently, people could register up under a specific party if they choose to participate in that party. So they can party hop, if I can use that as a term. But I think that to do this thing the right way, then we must allow other avenues, and same-day voter registration is a great example of that.
But doesn't that put the burden on the voter to change, as opposed to kind of having a system-wide acknowledgement that all registered voters should get to vote in elections?
Well, with same-day voter registration, as it is right now, we still have people, unfortunately, that are non-affiliated, and those that don't care to change party and just wait to the general election. I don't think that it'd be that difficult, because one is that through educating the public, the voters, what this is about and how it can be done, and it can be done easily. You can do it online, so it's not a huge feat. But my concern is, how do we get more people engaged? And I think that that same day voter registration process will be a doorway to do that.
Okay, thank you. And James, if you can go first on this, there is going to be on the November ballot a measure asking voters if they want to adopt ranked choice voting in state and federal elections. What is your view on that measure?
In Senate Rules Committee, when the bill came to us about ranked choice voting, I do have some questions about ranked choice voting. Currently, Oregon, we have the highest uh, participation rate in voting in our election system in the nation. So first thing come to mind is that, what are we trying to fix? The second thing comes into mind when I look at ranked choice voting, what impact would that have on communities of color access to the ballot? Because it's a numbers system. If you're not known, or they have been participating in the election process for years, and you got name recognition, perhaps that will favor you greatly for ranked choice voting. However, this bill is going to the people for a decision. So I voted in favor to move it out of committee, and I voted in favor of it on the Senate floor to move it forward, so the people of Oregon will make a decision. And as Secretary of State, whatever decision the people of Oregon decide, that is the one that I will implement faithfully.
Great, thank you. And Tobias, how about you? What are your thoughts on the ranked choice ballot measure?
I think this is a really interesting concept that has the potential of motivating people who have otherwise felt disconnected from the process to vote. And from that standpoint, I'm very intrigued and excited about, frankly, about anything that has more people participating. But this has been interesting too in the conversations with clerks. When I said before, lots of clerks have different things they want to talk about, different challenges and all that sort of thing. Every single clerk, even before, I think in every case I brought up ranked choice voting. And they said two interesting things. One, they all had a version of concern about how to implement this policy should it pass. And then, in a very encouraging addition, after a pause, they said, but we'll get it figured out. The implementation, I think, is going to be really important if it passes. It's going to be different for voters on any given ballot. Some offices might require a ranked choice voting approach. Others would not. That will take some getting used to. The details, I think, really matter here, and there are pieces that I think most people don't think about. The fact that there are just a handful of major providers of the technology that county clerks use to print and count ballots. An election that spans multiple counties has to have a different process then, so that those votes would be consolidated or tabulated, as they say. All of those things have to happen in a way that's going to be beyond questioning. We started talking in this conversation about how people don't feel confidence in the voting systems that we currently have. We've got work to do on that front. And if we're adding an entirely new structure and an entirely new system that would apply in some cases and not others, that kind of work is going to be all the more important. So the intent, I think, is clear and laudable. And to the extent it helps more people choose to participate, that is great. But this is another example of complicated implementation that requires a Secretary of State with a track record of success of taking those complicated things on in a way that brings people along and that boosts confidence and delivers results.
Great, thank you. I'd like to go into kind of the situation involving Nishad Singh, who gave $500,000 to the Democratic Party of Oregon, or it was reported as coming from him, initially reported from coming from Prime Trust, which was simply the wire transfer company as opposed to the actual donor. There have been a lot of criticisms that I know we've covered extensively regarding how the Secretary of State's office handled this, particularly considering its very close relationship with the Democratic Party of Oregon. The elections director used to work for them, used to be I believe, the deputy director, and just very tight relationships and contributions between the DPO and top Democrats. Do you think that it was appropriately handled? And Tobias, you're the first to go on this. What, if anything, would you do differently to manage that kind of a situation?
I think on virtually any question, this one is a particularly good example of it. It starts with tone at the top. It starts with the expectation that the Secretary of State sets, and I feel really good about the record I've established as a state representative and as state treasurer, saying that my job is to serve the people, not the party that I happen to identify with. And so I think having those expectations and those standards and those processes very clearly in place is going to be key. And then as to the actual process and sequence, I think we've also seen plenty of examples of where the Secretary of State does not necessarily have the capacity in place presently to deal with those questions. And so being able to go back to the legislature and have the opportunity to invest in additional capacity so there can be more timely responses is going to be part of it. We did a lot of that in Treasury in ways that have boosted our capacity in the investment division and generated savings for the entire state. So having the capacity and having the expectations, I think are keys. That's how I would approach those questions.
And so in terms of like additional elections compliance officials or investigators, or is
Yes.
that okay? Okay. And James, same question for you in terms of the handling of the Nishad Singh case. Would you look to create a different system or anything in terms of handling those kinds of cases where there are, arguable conflicts of interest, if not actual conflicts of interest?
Well, just to go back to House Bill 4024, campaign finance reform, there's an opportunity to expand upon that. I had mentioned previously about dark money coming in or how money is flowing, regardless if it's what party it is or not, where it's coming from. For me, myself, I'm a small dollar donor. I mean, my campaign is based on small dollar donations, and it's up on OLIS, so you can see everybody individual that have donated to my campaign. Demonstrated success is something that deals with trust. And in order for us to make sure that our election system, whether or not it's is contributions coming into a campaign or individuals paying out to another source, is critically important. It is the oversight and the transparency that's very vital. That I am well established at that, well practiced at that. My years in the military have strong accolades, and I have received enormous amounts of accommodations and stuff as to integrity and trust. As a leader, those are quintessential items for determining who is going to be the best person in the office of Secretary of State in order to make sure that we are doing the work on behalf of the people, not behalf of the party or corporations or anybody else. It comes down to the people. What are we going to be doing about that? In this case that you cited, I think that there could be more transparency, more openness. I think that, you know, anything that may arouse suspicion must be brought out so that people will understand what's going on. If not, that seed of distrust will start to germinate and continue to go on. I'm not saying that there was anything nefarious about that transaction. I don't know anything about it, but judging from what I hear and how you characterize it, I think that getting out in front of this and making sure that there is no doubt whether or not it was illegal, illegal, or if it's something that a practice that should be disengaged. Certainly, campaign finance reform is going to be has to be expanded, and it's going to have to deal with more incidents, and one is like this one.
Great, thank you. I think going back to the Shemia Fagan situation, it's notable, and Betsy and Jamie can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I don't believe any Democrats, any elected Democrats, were standing up calling for Shemia Fagan to resign. The Secretary of State is expected to certainly show to not be partisan in how they act in their office. Can you, and James, if you can go first on this, I guess I'm wondering, how can you, you know, can you explain just, you know, did you have any thoughts about whether Fagan should have been resigning earlier? And if so, you know, why wouldn't you share those? And can people assume that you would stand up and speak out against your party if need be?
Well, let me begin with this nonpartisanship. I'm in my second term as in the Senate and my second concurrent term as President Pro Tem. The first time I was elected, it was on a bipartisan vote. Last year, during the inaugural opening of session, I was re-elected unanimously by the entire body. That means that Democrats and Republicans alike felt that I was the one with the highest degree of trust and integrity. That says a lot about leadership. That says a lot about a person's character. So when I became aware of the incidents and the things that had occurred between the secretary at that time doing an investigation or an audit and accepting money, as I heard, I wasn't aware of all the ins and outs. I am not quick to rush the judge. I'm a former police officer and a private investigator. I believe in following the story until you have all of the pertinent information. As I understand, there is still ongoing information about that. I do think that the secretary did the right thing by leaving office because the integrity of the office is more important than the individual that sits there supposed to be doing the work of the people. Another thing, a reporter asked me, he said that the office, after that incident, the office of Secretary of State doesn't pay a lot. And I reminded that person, I served 24 years active duty Army. It didn't pay a lot either. For me, it's about the service. It's about the opportunity and the privilege of serving the people. Did the secretary do the right thing? I think she did. I didn't have all of the information, so I'm not one, and that's regardless of whoever it is, because my job as a certified mediator, my job is to understand all of the facts, the same way I will be doing in Office of Secretary of State when I'm doing census sessions to find out the temperature of all of the employees, what they're doing, what they're expecting, what are the problems that they're having to resolve those issues, to bring them on board and to form a team. I am the kind of person that will go down and sit down at the desk and talk to everybody individually, and that will go out in the field and talk to everybody because I'm a public servant. And I believe that that is the job of a public servant. And what the secretary did, I think she did a public service when she resigned.
Great, thank you. Tobias, same question for you. In terms of just Did you think that Shemia Fagan should have resigned? And if so, why didn't you speak up? And can Oregonians expect that you will push back against Democrats in your role as Secretary of State?
Yes, I want to answer it really directly. I think Secretary Fagan did do the right thing in resigning and allowing the office to move forward. The question is whether people can expect me to push back when appropriate. I think the clear answer is yes, and that's one of the things that you can see from my clear record as state treasurer. Whenever one of the most common things I think people say to a treasurer is, you know what you ought to invest in. And it's a challenge to continue to manage those expectations and to manage a fund that is not public money. It's the retirement funds of 400,000 plus people, and I disappoint a lot of people, a lot of places where politics tries to enter into those conversations, and being a fiduciary means putting others' interests ahead of your own. That's something I'm very comfortable with, having served in executive office as one of the three constitutional officers, and bringing that sensibility to a large statewide agency in Oregon. That does not require translation, and it's something that I will bring to the Secretary of State's office, being very clear that I serve Oregonians, not a party with whom I happen to identify.
And did you feel beforehand, though, that Shemia Fagan should have resigned? And if so, why didn't you say something publicly?
Well, I wanted to be, as my recollection is that was moving very quickly at that time, and she made a decision pretty quickly to resign as things moved so fast. I did not want to be in front before I understood the story, but I certainly was feeling like the direction was moving pretty quickly, and we wanted to make sure that we had that whole picture. It's easy as we now think about it. I think, at least in my head, the things that we know now, I think we learned a lot of those after she resigned. So I think she did do the right thing in allowing the office to move forward. And the question now is where we go from here.
I'd like to talk a little bit about audits. And Tobias, you had mentioned in your response that there's a view, at least, that audits are being driven by political considerations or are being viewed as political documents. Can you explain a little bit more, like, what you mean by that, or what specific audits do you think are being cast that way?
Yeah, I hear from a variety of different people who will point to some specific audits and some of the language that is around them as evidence they perceive that it wasn't a straight up assessment, that the conclusion was sort of in mind before the audit was done. And for me, whether or not that is true is less important than the perception. It's a bit like the conversation we were having about voting. How people feel about this matters. The credibility that's associated with those audits really adds to their effectiveness, and eventually to the capacity for the Secretary of State, with the legislature's budget approval, to do more of that work. It is essential that we have an audit division that is both in fact and perceived to be driven by realistic assessments of risk and opportunity. I hear this frequently now, and as I mentioned, being treasurer, everybody has a stock tip. The same appears to be true for candidates for Secretary of State. Frequently, people will say to me, "You know what, you ought to audit," and they might be right, but I think it's premature to be too specific. It's important to have a rigorous process that assesses risk and proceeds from there. That's what's going to allow people to take the findings of an audit seriously, and allow the Secretary of State's office to be in a stronger position to follow up on that, to continue to shine a light on things that may be going well and need to be expanded, or things that need to be corrected. The perception here is really important. It is not my agenda that should be driving an audit plan. It's the agenda of the state. It's the places where money is being spent, or where the well-being of Oregonians are at risk.
And I guess that's I understand what you're saying, but I guess part of it is just that determining what is risk is that based on financial? Is it based on just performance, like for instance, education. There was the PPS audit a number of years
Yes.
back under Secretary Richardson. There's been K-12, Oregon K-12. That is certainly money, but I think many others just kind of view it as the necessity of understanding how well our programs are working. So are there any programs that you think kind of, merit a strong look at how they're performing?
Yeah, I think you point out, you've added essentially there are three things here that we've talked about. So one is money, one is performance, and of course the measures of performance are going to vary according to the program and the agency and the purpose and so on. And the other is that well-being of Oregonians. So I think the capacity is probably not a match for things, for the volume of things that we would like to audit. So we're going to need to do some prioritization, some hard choices. But for me, without being prematurely specific, I think those things where we are spending a lot of money and where the well-being, the quality of life in very real ways is at stake. So various parts of OHA and DHS and corrections are coming to mind immediately. And education, yes, where we spend so much and where there's such a disconnect between the central funding mechanisms and the individual decisions made by 197 school districts around the state. Those are elements, but I think that risk assessment tailored to the specific program area is what's going to drive it. It should not be the secretary, her or himself's individual agenda.
Great, thank you. And James, for you, on audits, are there certain areas that you think that the Secretary of State's office should be looking at, or that you would seek to look at as secretary, or how would you go about deciding what audits to pursue?
Well, first, let me start off saying that I am a graduate from the United States Army Inspector General University, and part of that has to do with auditing. I've conducted audits nationally, internationally, very thorough, with certain outcomes. I've led audit teams. Leadership is truly important. The advantage I have here in this case with regards to this question is that I've been in Oregon State Senate for 8 years now. So I have a lot of interaction with a lot of people, lobbyists, everyday people, and also what I see that's occurring in the news. So there are some things that are very extremely troubling to me. And because of what I've heard consistently over and over and over again, they shine a huge spotlight on these three areas. One, the hiring practices of ODOT with regards to minority and women-owned businesses. I have a consistent hearing about that from small business owners throughout the state. That's a concern of mine. I think it's worth auditing to get to the bottom of this. Remember, we're trying to be transparent and we're going to be accountable at the same time. The other one is that currently hospitals are closing, urgent care centers are closing across Oregon. Here in my city, Eugene, Peace Health closed down the only hospital that we have in the downtown area. So people have to drive an additional 20 minutes or more in order to get any kind of medical services. Peace Health also closed down their urgent care centers. So the lack of access to quality healthcare has diminished. I want to know what OHA is doing about that, or what records that they have. Let's bring all of this out because there's something going on. And when there are taxpayers' dollars that's going in there and the people are starting to suffer because of that, I will get to the bottom of that, wherever it goes. The other part, I've had so many people call me requesting assistance from unemployment. People have been without unemployment pay that qualify for it for weeks and months. Some are even starting to receive eviction notices. I understand that there is a new system that they have in place, but this was going on before this new system. I think that the Oregon Employment Department deserves an audit, a very thorough audit. We can flush out what's going wrong, at least make the people of Oregon more knowledgeable about the processes and what's going on. I am very strategic when it comes down to audits, and these three areas alone have been something that I have been hearing consistently over the last 8 years. So yes, those are three that I would take on.
Great, thank you. Before we give you each a couple minutes to wrap up, does anyone have any questions that they want to ask? No?
Don't think I do.
Okay, then let's see, I guess Tobias, if you wouldn't mind going first on just kind of wrapping up, why you think voters should vote for you, or anything along those lines.
Sure. Well, I appreciate the time to talk about this race. It is important, and I'm really excited about it. I think really just to end where I began. I don't think people have to probably look very hard to think about why this race and this office are important. Our democracy is under attack in a lot of ways. Fortunately, it's somewhat less acute in Oregon, given the work that we've done, but we shouldn't assume that we are invulnerable to those kinds of things. So it's essential to have a person with the commitment and the ability to stand up to those kinds of attacks, not letting people undermine our elections processes, or the people carrying them out, or the people participating in them. And the fact that the reputation of the Secretary of State's office has been diminished in recent years really diminishes our entire government, and the confidence that people feel and willingness to engage in civic life. The audit function of the Secretary of State's office has to be above reproach, has to be driven not by an individual's agenda or political preferences or party affiliation, but by realistic assessments of risk. There are lots of good ideas for where audits ought to occur, but that needs to be part of a disciplined process that is driven by data. And this office needs to be occupied by someone who has the track record of specific experience in the context of Oregon. Running a statewide agency, being elected to statewide office, serving in constitutional office is different than being in the legislature. And I learned a lot in the legislature. I would be a totally different person if I didn't have that experience. But being able to bring the experience of 7 years plus of success at the Treasury really puts me in a spot to step seamlessly into the office of Secretary of State and restore competence, restore stability and professionalism to an office that I think Oregonians really depend on. That's why I'm excited about this race. It's why I've enjoyed the conversation, and why I'm looking forward to more of it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. And James, do you want to kind of offer your closing thoughts?
Thank you. This is really, really important. I appreciate the conversation. The questions themselves were very thoughtful and direct, I think. Let me say this. This office is about leadership. It is about integrity. It is about commitment. It is about honesty. It is about truthfulness. My time as a decorated United States Army veteran retiree, as a diplomat representing America overseas, as a U.S. Army Assistant Inspector General, I'm just not a legislator. I have worked at the federal level. I have worked in high stakes arenas with foreign countries and diplomats. One of the things that I find that's always truthful, that's true to form, is that your integrity, your honesty, it matters. That was demonstrated in my term, my second concurrent term as President Pro Tem of the Oregon State Senate. I passed over 120, maybe 30 measures since I've been in Oregon State Senate. I think that that's a pretty good record. police reform, healthcare, schools, you name it. I have been there. Workers' protections. I learned it fast. I'm a quick learner, but more importantly, I'm one that am accountable. I'm accountable not just to you and the viewers, I'm accountable to myself. Because at the end of the day, I have to go home and go to sleep and get some sleep. It doesn't matter. I've never ran a statewide race, and that's not a requirement to go into the office of Secretary of State. What's really a requirement is, can you do the job? Do you have a background? Do you have experience? Do you have the skills? That would be me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both very much for taking time to talk with us. It was a really great conversation. We will be in touch with our endorsement probably this weekend, I think.
Very good.
Great.
Thanks for the time.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks.